morning. I'm your host, Avan Price here at Channel 6, and today, the show today, like I said, is on Black inventors. I have two lovely ladies here with me. I have Mabel Thornton, our nice resident, and our other resident, Janet Rife. Am I saying it right?
That's correct.
All right. Before we get started, ladies, I have an excerpt that I'm going to read for you just so we can start off the show properly. Because of a Eurocentric perspective on the world history of science and technology, the belief has persisted for centuries that Africans lack scientific and technological sophistication. In addition, many believe that the Middle Passage and subsequent brutal assimilation of the Euro-American culture erased whatever cultural heritage Africans had possessed. But recent research has shown that Africans were creative and inventive problem solvers in science, medicine, and agricultural progression prior to European contact. When Africans arrived in the New World, they used their technological knowledge of agriculture, boat building, fishing, iron production, medicine, and textile production to solve many of the problems facing America. Both before and after the American Revolution, slave and free African Americans were often highly skilled and recruited specifically because of those skills. Yeah. The resilient American culture was less a white man's culture and more of a multicultural product of African American, Native American, and European American intervention. Now, Mabel, can you tell us where this excerpt is coming from and what's it trying to tell us?
Okay, it's in this book by Jeffrey Stewart on African Americans, and he has done so much research, as many others, not only on inventions and whatnot, to show that blacks have done as much as any other people in the world of inventions, art, anything you can name. And we have this now in books, we have it on film, we have it on the internet, and we're just hoping and praying that everybody will understand this and not feel that blacks are inferior in any way. No race is inferior. All of us have been given abilities.
Yes.
And that's going to come out in a letter from Benjamin Banneker.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that kept this from being known for so long, especially about inventions, was that the slaves were not allowed to get patents. There were many slaves who invented machines to make their work easier. But slaves were refused patents by the patent office. The masters were not allowed to get a patent for them either. One example here is of Ned, a blacksmith. He invented a labor-saving cotton scraper. His master, Oscar Stewart, couldn't get a patent for it, but began to sell it anyway in 1860. Ned, of course, received nothing.
Wow.
Another example is Joe Anderson, the slave of Cyrus McCormick. He was given little credit for the invention of the automatic reaper, though it was his idea. His master reaped the financial rewards and the credit for having invented this machine that revolutionized farming in America. Okay? Now, we're not going to be able to do but a very few of the inventors. But there's one man named Elijah McCoy.
Okay.
And have you heard of the expression, is it the real McCoy?
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Okay.
Is this who they're talking about from that expression?
This is who they're talking about from that expression.
All right.
Wow.
This is his picture. Okay. This book is on many inventors, but this is the man that's talking about.
Okay.
Now, he lived between 1843 and 1929. He patented more than 15 inventions.
Mm-hmm.
The best known is the graphic automatic lubricator in 1872.
Mm-hmm.
Many other lubricators were patented but could not stand up to McCoy's. Its standard of quality was so rigorous that the term real McCoy came to apply to it and stand for the highest quality of product available.
Mm-hmm.
McCoy was born in a community of escaped slaves in Canada. He was trained as a mechanical engineer in Scotland. He migrated to Michigan and could only get a job as a locomotive fireman because he was black.
Mm-hmm.
This exposed him to the problem of overheating on trains, and that's how he came up with that lubricator. He later became an instructor in the use of the lubricator. Even though a company was formed with his name on it, he was not a major stockholder, and he ended up suffering financially and with health issues before he died. Okay.
Well, I have a question. So you said he had patents, right? So
Yeah,
I'm guessing he
could.
had it in Canada, or was it in the United States?
See, this is after slavery.
Oh, this is after. Okay.
Yeah, he was born in 1843 and he died in 1929.
Okay.
Yes.
So he was able to get a patent
Yeah.
for all his
Right.
inventions and
And
everything.
he wasn't born in the United States, he was born in Canada.
Okay.
And the community of escaped slaves, you know, many slaves escaped to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to Europe to be educated.
Mm-hmm.
But when he came back, he couldn't get a professional job.
That was going to be
Okay.
my next question. Did he ever go to school? But you just answered it.
Yes.
He was able to get
Yes.
some education.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Janet, you have something for us?
Am I next here? I guess so. Elizabeth Keckley was one that we wanted to recognize. She was a former slave. Now, she lived from 1818 through 1907. She was born in Dinwiddie, Virginia. After purchasing her freedom in 1855, she became a dressmaker for the wives of the political elite in Washington, D.C. Let me back up a bit here. She was a remarkable woman, born into slavery just south of the major market of Petersburg. She learned her craft sewing from her mother, who was an expert seamstress enslaved in the Burwell family.
Mm-hmm.
After 30 years of enslavement in the Burwell family, Keckley procured enough saved income from portions of self-hired earnings and loans from her white female customers to buy herself and her son out of slavery. In addition, much of her fame results from her relationship with the First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln. She became her dressmaker.
Nice.
And ironically, she was also the dressmaker for Jefferson Davis's wife.
Wow.
Which is pretty interesting. Anyway, a great deal, you know, you had some information about her having invented some new methods of sewing. I didn't quite find that here, but in addition to providing a rich portrait of a black woman who operated a successful business in slavery and freedom, Keckley's life also provides a rare opportunity to examine the significance of the needle arts. From the colonial era through the mid-19th century, when the needle arts became more mechanized and standardized, skilled dressmaking continued to be very specialized, prestigious, and competitive activity for both white and black women. Keckley's success was part business savvy, part technical skills, and part fashion design talent,
Wow.
fueled by a driving ambition. I mean, she had to be an exceptional lady.
I mean, she was making dresses for the president's wife.
Yeah, really. She had an exceptional ability to combine the latest European patterns with her own styles in catering to the tastes of her clients. This blending of old world traditions with indigenous styles and the artist's personal aesthetics helped define American culture as a whole. Quite a few representations in culture about her, and quite recent. 2007 novel, Mrs. Keckley Sends Her Regards. Another novel in 2013, Mrs. Lincoln's Dressmaker. A play that was at Arena Stage just in 2013, Mary T. and Lizzie K., which is about Mary Lincoln and Lizzie Keckley.
Okay.
In Steven Spielberg's film Lincoln, she is portrayed. So very interesting lady.
So I'm getting from her, she kind of was leading the whole fashion that was going around during that time. Am I right?
Yes, she really was. She really was. Very, very much ahead of her time, and to have come out of slavery. And she's had, in her personal story, a lot of suffering in her. She was impregnated against her will. Her one child was from her master. But, you know, she really had an ability to rise out of that.
And she was a businesswoman. See,
Absolutely.
that just shows, you know,
businesswoman.
you can have all the intelligence, but if you don't have that wisdom on how to use your smarts, and she obviously had wisdom,
She did.
and she knew how to pay for her own freedom. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then she was running her own little business going on.
Oh,
and
yeah, it
successful
was
at
a big business. Yeah.
Wow,
It's the
that's
sole
amazing.
proprietor of one of the most exclusive dressmaking shops in the city. She employed other seamstresses.
Wow.
Yeah, really interesting.
Awesome. So, Mabel?
Okay, we have Garrett Morgan.
Garrett Morgan.
Here's a picture of him and his mask. He invented the safety gas mask and an automatic traffic system that included the caution element as well as stop and go. We have an interesting story about him and his mask in Cleveland. In 1916, there was a gas explosion in the waterworks, and many workers were trapped underneath. Garrett, his brother, and a number of others were the ones who actually saved some of those underground because of the gas mask that had been used. But instead of the city honoring them with the whites, there were whites also who went down, the 4 white members of the squad, the rescue squad, were awarded medals by the city and heralded as heroes, while Garrett Morgan, whose ingenuity and bravery were the driving force of the rescue effort, were virtually ignored.
Wow.
The city government never recognized him for his act of heroism. But that gas mask was one that was very useful in the war, World War I.
Wow.
Yes.
And you said he also invented the traffic light, basically, the whole system for how that operates, right?
Well, yeah, not the electric lights. You know, they had traffic directions and whatnot before electricity came. And he was the one who put in the caution element of it.
Basically, like the yellow light.
The yellow light, right.
See, that's an invention that's still going on today that like helps us, because imagine
Oh,
the
indeed
chaos that would be happening. We never had any kind of traffic light on the road, especially here in Virginia.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
Yes, okay.
All right, who's our next person that we're going to go through?
Okay, Mabel, did you have 2 more here? Granville, Woods?
No.
No, okay.
Do it.
All right, so we'll go to Onesimus.
Onesimus, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Onesimus, let's see. He was much earlier in time. Onesimus, slave and medical pioneer, was born in the late 17th century, probably in Africa, although the precise date and place of his birth are unknown. He first appears in the historical record in the diary of Cotton Mather, a prominent New England theologian and minister of Boston's Old North Church. Reverend Mather notes in a diary entry for December 1706 that members of his congregation purchased for him, quote, a very likely slave, a young man who is a Negro of a promising aspect of temper. He named him Onesimus after a biblical slave who escaped from his master, an early Christian named Philemon. Onesimus was one of about 1,000 persons of African descent living in the Massachusetts colony, in 1/3 of them in Boston. Many were indentured servants with rights comparable to those of white servants, although many and only blacks were classified as chattel and bound as slaves. Onesimus did take the time to educate him. He believed that he could improve Onesimus by employing the, quote, principles of reason agreeably offered unto him, and by teaching him to read, write, and learn the Christian catechism. So that was, you know, that was certainly not done in most places for slaves at that time. What Onesimus thought of Mather's opinions, the historical record does not say, nor do we know much about his life other than that he was married and had a son. Okay. He did sign a document releasing Onesimus from service, but he also asked that he, or required, that he continue performing chores for the Mather family. Now here's where we come to why Onesimus is famous in this scientific. A little is known of Onesimus after he purchased his freedom, but Cotton Mather in 1721 used information he had learned 5 years earlier from his former slave to combat a devastating smallpox epidemic that was then sweeping Boston. In a 1716 letter to the Royal Society of London, Mather proposed ye method of inoculation as the best means of curing smallpox, and noted that he had learned of this process from my Negro man Onesimus, who was a pretty intelligent fellow, and that's a quote. Onesimus had explained in this way. When asked if he'd ever had smallpox, Onesimus answered yes and no, explaining he had been inoculated with a small amount of smallpox, which left him immune to the disease. Mather asked for details, and Onesimus showed him his scar. Mather took the unusual step in his writings of recording Onesimus's words with African accent included. People take juice of smallpox and cut his skin and put in a drop. So he got that information from Onesimus, that he was written up into to a letter to the Royal Society of London.
So to make sure I'm understanding, you're telling me that this person helped in the findings, or whatever you want to say, for the vaccination for smallpox.
Right. He apparently was this. I believe they're saying this is the first time this was thought of. Now Mather was a smart enough fellow too, and he had thought about being a doctor, so he knew to ask these questions of Onesimus. But at that point, then apparently any slave who had the scar was very desirable, because they knew then that he was going to be immune from smallpox.
Interesting.
So, and of course, Onesimus never got any credit for this until much later.
No
times.
medical training, or he had
no
knowledge.
No, none whatsoever. But he shared that information with Mather. So fascinating stories.
Wow, that's amazing. I see you want to say something, Mabel.
No medical training here in the United States, but this he had learned in Africa.
Okay.
So whereas they might not have had the hospitals or whatnot we have, they did have types of training that in medicine and in whatnot that helped them to develop things like this.
That's an interesting point. They were bringing their, like the Africans, they were bringing all their knowledge and everything they had learned to America. I didn't even consider that. That's a good point.
Okay.
Well, that's a good point, Mabel, because I'm not sure I even got that in my reading of this, that he had this done in Africa, but of course he did. Yeah. But I hadn't even I hadn't quite computed that information. So okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Well, let's go to Benjamin Banneker, that I know everybody's heard of, but I will read some of the things he was. He was an astronomer, a climatologist, an entomologist, an author, a surveyor, and many other things, born in Elliott City, Maryland. And I won't go into that there, but I want to go to the almanac in particular. We also know he constructed a clock. But when he constructed his almanac, the write-up here tells us about the letter that he wrote to Thomas Jefferson.
Okay.
Now, Thomas Jefferson was president, and some people don't like to hear you call him a hypocrite, but some of us do, because of the fact of all of the beautiful writings he has, and then he still was a slave owner and still did not do anything to free the slaves. So on August 19, 1791, Banneker sent Thomas Jefferson the following letter, along with a copy of his almanac. So I suppose it is a truth too well attested to you to need a proof here that we are a race of beings who have long labored under the abuse and censure of the world, that we have been long looked upon with an eye of contempt, and that we have long been considered rather as brutish than human, and scarcely capable of mental endowments. I apprehend you will embrace every opportunity to eradicate that train of absurd and false ideas and opinions which so generally prevail with respect to us, and that your sentiments are concurrent with mine, which are that one universal Father has given being to us all, and endowed us all with the same faculties, and that however variable we may be in society or religion, however diversified in situation or color, we are all of the same family and stand in the same relation to him. But, sir, how pitiable it is to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution of these rights and privileges which he has conferred upon them, that you should at the same time counteract his mercies in detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren under groaning captivity and cruel oppression, that you should at the same time be found guilty of the most criminal act which you professedly detest in others with respect to yourselves. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of the Jefferson response, but he responded in a very good way, and he promised him he was going to send this almanac and this a copy of the letter to the secretary of the Academy of Sciences at Paris, and a member of the Philanthropic Society, because he said, I consider it as a document to which your whole color have a right for their justification against the doubts which have been entertained of them. But then the author of the book makes a note. Curiously, Condorcet never received a copy of Banneker's almanac. Okay?
I thought that that letter was pretty strong. There was a
very
lot
strong.
It was a very strong letter. It was a mixture of frustration, and I liked how he brought up kind of like we're all civilized. Like we all are same kind of people. We look different, but we all have kind of the same parts. We all have a brain who can function. Why are we looked upon as people who can't function and don't have a civilized way of living? You can see the frustration that he's having, not just for himself, but just for all
all
blacks.
of them, right?
Yeah, that was a very strong letter.
And it shows also how we did have blacks who could talk like that, speak like that, and write like that before, the last few years. It's not something that has come about us in the last 100 years or more. Because Banneker lived between 1731 and 1806. And we did have people who spoke out. And you could think of King with the language he's using, Dr. King's, language.
Yeah.
But there were people then, but we didn't listen.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's move on.
On Jefferson, I quite agree. And Jefferson, of course, is one of our great heroes. But it's almost in our DNA that there was a flaw from the very beginning, because he wrote so beautifully about freedom and equality for all, but he could not see what was under his nose. He could not see that. It's really, it's a shame.
It's kind of that.
It's part of our history that we have to reckon with. We have to realize that.
It's that old biblical parable. Don't tell your brother about the speck in his eye when you have a plank in your own eye. Look at yourself first.
And if you've been to Monticello, you can almost see it. He may have treated his slaves fairly well, but they were still enslaved. But he couldn't give up all of that free labor. He couldn't give that up.
Greed.
To keep up his beautiful, beautiful place.
All right, we got 5 minutes.
Is that all?
Yeah, I know. It's just flying
I know,
by.
it goes fast.
More or less, I guess we do now is to
Lordy.
call their names and tell what they invented.
Do you want?
Don't try to rush, but we got 5 minutes. Let's just.
Okay, this will be quick then. Norbert Rillieux, 1806 to 1894, Creole American inventor and engineer, most noted for his invention of the multiple effect evaporator, an energy efficient means of evaporating water. He was born in Louisiana, had access to education. You know, he was more well-to-do than most of the people we've talked about. Sugar refining, let's see, sugar refining. I mean, it's all about improving the process of sugar refining. So his, well, the evaporators were so efficient that the sugar makers were able to cover the cost of the new machine with the huge profits from the sugar produced with the reused system. And I believe he did have his patent. I believe he was recognized for that at the time. So.
Okay, Daniel Hale Williams is the next one.
Okay.
And he was a medical person.
All right.
And he was the first to perform open heart surgery.
Oh, wow.
And it was done on a man who was brought into him, and he had other surgeons. He had 6 staff surgeons at that time. And he was able to open up the man's chest and do everything that was needed. And it took a while. He had to perform a second surgery on him. But after, I think he said another month or so, first he stayed in the hospital for a total, I think, of about 4 months altogether. But he left the hospital fully recovered.
Awesome.
So that was his gift. And
I was talking to my brother about this earlier. He didn't believe me
Oh,
about
no.
open heart surgery, and I brought up, because I know about Mr. Hale. I know about Hale Williams, and I was telling him about it because I was talking about this show. He didn't believe me about the open heart surgery, especially back then during that time. And I was like, oh no, there's someone who did it.
Oh, yeah.
Doing it.
Yes.
The person recovered, like you said.
Yeah, he had a hard time getting his education and all, but he did. He got it.
Wow, since we're on surgery, I'm going to skip Drew and go to Vivian Thomas because he's, he's quite awesome. We don't want to leave him out.
No.
He was the grandson of a slave born in Louisiana. African-American surgical technician who developed the procedures used to treat blue baby syndrome in the 40s. Assistant to surgeon Alfred Blaylock at Vanderbilt and later at Johns Hopkins. He served as supervisor of the surgical laboratories at Johns Hopkins for 35 years. A film based on his life, Something the Lord Made, 2004, PBS documentary, Partners of the Heart. I mean, his story is amazing. I mean, he was not recognized in his lifetime, but he worked alongside this Blaylock, who kind of got all the credit. But he was, I mean, the first time they operated on a human being, Thomas, he says, Thomas stood on a step stool at Blaylock's shoulder and coached him step by step through the procedure. And then a big article about it, May 45 of the Journal of American Medical Association, gave credit to Blaylock, but never mentioned Thomas. Now, fortunately, in more recent times, he has been acknowledged, and there is a memorial to him at Johns Hopkins and a painting of him. And they presented him with an honorary doctorate. But these stories are just amazing to us. And he was not paid the same, and so sometimes he resorted to working as a bartender at Blaylock's parties, even though he was a research associate. And today it would take a person with a master's degree to even be able to do that. So amazing story.
Okay.
All right, what do you have last for us, Mabel?
Percy Julian,
Okay.
an organic chemist. He is known for his treatment for glaucoma and synthetic hormones and the aerial foam that's used to extinguish fires. And he was so great, and I'll just read this last paragraph.
Okay.
He was a civil rights advocate and philanthropist. Julian held 14 honorary degrees, was the 1946 recipient of the NAACP's Spingarn Medal, author of 50 scientific papers, and holder of more than 100 United States patents. He died on April the 19th, 1975 in Illinois. He and George Washington Carver are the only African-American inventors in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. But the steroids, that is another one. I didn't mention that. one of the things that, one of the medicines that he is responsible for, which is very important in medicine today.
Well, that's awesome, man. I'm sad to say that our time is wrapping up for today. It just flew by.
It does.
Really, really quickly. And I've enjoyed learning all these things about these different inventors, and especially during their time period that they were in, when like all the odds were against them, and they were still able to do these amazing things. And what just came to my memory is I remember when we were young, my dad took me and my siblings to this museum out in Baltimore, I believe it is. We're out in the Maryland area. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called the Black and Wax Museum. Never heard of it?
Haven't.
But it's a really good museum. They have everything on like African American history, from Africa to their whole travel in America. They had like the best kind of models. You got to walk in a modeled slave ship and see how those things were structured, and those are very shocking. It was like, I'll never forget, there was like this one small like box, and it fit 2 people in it, and they were like stuffed in there. And it just goes throughout all of history, just like the inventors, like civil rights people, just everything. So if you ever have a chance, you know.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, look it up. And, I believe it's in Baltimore. I might be wrong, but I know it's in the Maryland area because we had a long drive going there. But thank you, Mabel. Thank you, Janet, coming down and doing the show. I know it took us a while to get to do it, but I'm glad we did get to do it.
Thank you, Avan.
Okay, thank you so much. And do I have time for my poem?
Yeah, you can do your
not
poem.
my poem. Okay.
She has one more poem, people. Let her read
It's
her
by
poem.
Langston Hughes. I dream a world where man no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights her day. A world I dream where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth and every man is free. Where wretchedness will hang its head and joy, like a pearl, attend the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream our world.
Well, I don't think I can top that kind of ending, but thank you for that poem. So before I let you go, everyone.